Poolside, perfecting my tan for the start of school next month. Mom was in the kitchen cooking her famous fettuccine alfredo, and Dad was on the way home with a movie from Redbox. My life was perfect, but everything was about to change with the arrival of a new neighbor next door. He was a former police officer, probably mid-50s, possessed a firm drill sergeant-like tone, but was very friendly and talkative. Initially, he seemed like a good fit for the neighborhood. He was cordial, always made an effort to wave or say hi, and the presence of someone with a law enforcement background provided a sense of security. But everything began to unravel quickly, and the catalyst seemed to be me. My neighbor took a sudden and keen interest in me. Whenever I went outside, I could feel his eyes examining me. He would always wander over and try to start conversations with me, but as soon as he heard or saw my parents, he would leave. He asked me if I had any social media accounts. When I lied and said no, he asked if he could take a picture of me and proceeded to snap a pic before I could reply. I felt completely unnerved and frightened about his intentions for me. For all I knew, that we could have a murderer or pedophile living a mere feet from our home. I knew I had to delve deeper, so one night I aimed my telescope at his window, and what I saw only amplified the alarm bells going off in my head. The man was fixated on the picture of me on his phone, and I could even see a small stack of photos on his nightstand, a young girl's image on top. My blood ran cold, as this all but confirmed my fear. He must be a pedophile. The next night, I saw him sneakily rummaging through our trash can. I watched in horror and disbelief as he removed my used tampon, got into his car, and sped off in the night. This was the final straw. I knew that in the morning, I would have to alert my parents and get in contact with the police. And next morning, I awoke to the sound of police sirens and a loud commotion downstairs. I hopped out of bed and saw my parents being taken away in handcuffs. I started screaming and crying as I rushed towards the door, but I was stopped by the neighbor. With a horrified expression, he muttered, "I'm so sorry. Those aren't your real parents. You were kidnapped and missing the past 14 years. DNA test confirmed it."
It was on Friday night. I was finishing the last deliveries that I worked for. I was headed to the bar that I would usually go to every night to grab a glass of wine. I noticed there was a new bar that had recently opened, a kilometer away from the usual bar, so I decided to try it out. When I arrived and pushed the entrance door, I noticed something very weird. There were only 5 people inside, and they were all dressed in Halloween costumes, like vampire, ghost, werewolf, witch, and black magician. I felt really uncomfortable because I was the only ordinary person there, and also because Halloween was over 2 days ago. I was still awkwardly standing there blocking the entrance when all of a sudden, all the people started staring at me as if I had done something terribly wrong. I made my move and walked over to the bartender. The bartender looked almost like a real executioner. He asked me rudely in a gruff voice, "What do you want to sacrifice, blood or flesh?" Well, that creeped the hell out of me, but I thought this was his way of taking a Halloween order of alcohol. So I requested to him, "1 glass of blood, please." He turned around, grabbed a wine bottle, and poured it into a wine glass. Later, he opened a drawer and took out a black satanic pentagram necklace. He dipped the necklace 3 times while muttering something into my drink. To my surprise, the wine turned black in color, and he placed the glass on the table and told me to drink it in 1 shot. I was really thirsty at that moment, so I took the glass and drank it completely. It was quite strong, and my vision was slowly starting to blur. I paid the bartender and left the bar immediately. While I was walking, I started to feel dizzy and my vision was worsening. I wasn't focused on where I was going, as my mind was in a vision of all the faces of all the people I saw in that bar, maniacally laughing and giggling at me. All of a sudden, I had already arrived home during my vision. At first, I was relieved, but when I closed the door behind me and turned around, I knew that I was in the wrong house. It was completely abandoned, cold, gloomy, and barely lit with the rays of moonlight. I tried to open the door, but it was totally locked. Right when I was going to run into the door to break it, I heard the upper wooden ceiling was creaking, as if someone was up there walking slowly, step by step. I was really afraid as I had no weapon to protect myself. I tried to call 911, but had no reachable service to call. My only option was to go upstairs and find my way out. I carefully walked upstairs and reached the top. To my left was a dead end, but to my right, I saw a hallway with 3 doors on each side. I opened the doors one by one to find nothing but dark, empty rooms and no way to escape. Finally, when I opened the 6th door, I saw a pentagram was drawn on the floor with 5 candles around, touching all 5 corners of the star. This sent me back to where the bartender dipped a necklace with the same symbol into my drink, and there was a figure floating vertically right above the symbol below. But the light provided by the candles was not enough for me to figure out what was floating. Accidentally, I dropped my phone on the old wooden floor, which created a loud sound. The figure was slowly advancing to my direction. I quickly backed off and hit my head against a wall behind. That figure, I can't forget it. My body was completely paralyzed when I saw that the same bartender at the bar was this guy. He was still dressed as an executioner and faced my powerless body. To make matters worse, the doors of the empty room started opening on their own, one by one, and out came all of the 5 people I saw at the bar. They were all laughing at me to the point I passed out. Then I heard silence. Then I woke up and realized that I was in a hospital. I asked one of the nurses what was going on. She told me that a group of teenagers saw me walking out of the forest and then walking to the abandoned house. They tried calling out to me, but I didn't respond nor look at them. Then the group saw me entering the house, and when they tried to open the door, it was locked. And so they called 911 thinking that I was trapped in that house. 30 minutes later, the police staff arrived and broke open the door and found me unconscious lying on the floor. They brought me into the hospital and were trying to investigate what had happened in that abandoned house. Later, I told police officers the whole story when they came to ask, but they didn't seem to believe me, while some of them were laughing, thinking that I was making it up. After that, I went home and directly went to sleep. The next morning, I hurried to the bathroom because I had to vomit very badly. And after I did, I noticed that my vomit was black. To forget things, I tried taking a cold shower. And when I was showering, I felt a sharp sting on my back. Then, when I changed the water temperature from cold to warm, the sting started to feel even more painful. I turned back with my head, barely making it to see behind. Then I was shocked for life. I had the same satanic pentagram carved on my back, which was surely done by a sharp object. From then on, I never went to a bar again.
My name is Kate. I'm 22 years old, and about 3 years ago, I got a job working at Sam's Club. My best friend, Mimi, who worked there before me, was the one who suggested that I apply there. Her job was to work on the cash register. Mine was to stock shelves and keep certain areas tidy. One day, a young man entered the store and started to make conversation with me. I would say he was around 25 years old. After some friendly chit-chat, he eventually said that I looked like a model, and he has contacts within the modeling agencies. Honestly, I didn't believe a word he said, He was nice, but I wasn't about to fall for this. After many attempts of trying to persuade me to go with him to meet somewhere, to meet some contacts, he eventually gave up. He didn't leave the store, however, because about 5 minutes later I noticed him talking to Mimi as she was working on the cash register. I was hoping she wouldn't fall for it, but unfortunately she did. At the end of our shift, we spoke about what the guy had said, and Mimi really believed that the guy could get her modeling gigs. I told her not to meet him, and she said she wouldn't. About a week later, she didn't turn up to work and wasn't answering calls or texts. In fact, she kind of went missing. It was about a week until I finally heard from her. She was in a hospital. Mimi had met up with the guy from the store. She wouldn't say what happened in detail, but what she did tell me was disturbing enough. She met up with the guy from the store in a very old rundown apartment. There were 2 very large men, one skinny old guy. She was attacked. 2 men drugged her, and she fell unconscious. And when she woke up, she was in extreme pain. The men she met up with knocked her out and took all of her belongings. The police said that she was lucky. I'm sorry that Mimi had to go through all of that, but thankfully she wasn't killed. But I'm glad it wasn't me that got lured into the man's sick plan.
I was 15. I was at my boyfriend's house and it was about 10:30 p.m. We were sitting on his trampoline in his backyard, which faces a small park behind his house. His yard is on a ground level, about a meter above the ground level the park is on, and his fence is on that lower level. So by sitting on the trampoline, we could see out into the darkness of the park, which was just slightly illuminated by his yard lights. We're talking when suddenly I feel an eerie chill, like we're being watched, like something wants us to know we're being watched. I remember glancing all over the place and jumping at the smallest sounds of the night. My boyfriend was laughing at me, and all before he suddenly stilled and rose up onto his knees to look at something in the park.
Hey, there's a man watching us from that tree over there.
Those words still chill me to the core. I froze and asked him to tell me what he was doing. He told me that the man was very tall, almost halfway up the tree, which was a large eucalyptus, and that only his head and shoulder were really visible, and that his eyes were glowing or reflecting the light from his yard lights. I wondered if he was lying and making fun of me again for being paranoid earlier, so I sat up and leaned over him to see the thing next to the tree. There it was. It was tall and darker than the shadows of the trees, and wasn't lit up like the trees were from the lights. Its eyes were shining brightly, and it was exceptionally tall. It couldn't be a man, if not for the shoulder and arm draped over the tree, and so it wasn't an animal either. I fell back onto the trampoline, and my boyfriend told me to be quiet and to start moving back towards the house. It was moving towards us. I shook my head. I didn't want to move. I couldn't even bring myself to move. I was frozen in fear or something. I don't know, but I remember he had to force me up, swearing loudly and telling me it was nearly at the fence. I got up and caught a glance of a figure nearly across the short distance from the trees to his yard, and I booked it to the stairs up to his front door. I glanced back to look again, and my boyfriend yelled at me not to, and that he was climbing over the fence. And I somehow moved even faster and made it to the door without tripping up the stairs and breaking a leg. He told me again it had been trying to climb over the fence when I slowed down to take a look. His family is very religious, and his father swears it was a demon trying to test their faith or something, but I don't think it was. I had another encounter maybe a month later. My boyfriend told me that a figure was watching me from exposed ceiling beams of my old barn-like house during a FaceTime call late at night. Maybe a shadow man. Maybe an Australian version of a skinwalker. I'm not really sure, and I'm 19 now, and I still can't stop thinking about what happened.
My name is Lanai, and I'm an 18-year-old from New Jersey that is currently living in Ohio. And this experience happened to me a few months ago at my brother's house. My brother Ivan had just moved into this house with his wife and his 10-year-old child. It was my first ever time visiting, since I was working all the time and we was barely home. Anyway, I arrived at my brother's house and got out of my car. As soon as I pulled into the driveway of the place, I started getting an uneasy feeling. The house was a blue 3-story house that was surrounded by 2 other houses, and while I grabbed my purse, I glanced up at the window. I froze. Because staring back at me from the 2nd floor window was this older man wearing a flannel. His hair was long and was messy, but he was gone within seconds. I brushed this off, figuring maybe Ivan and our other brother Ian was screwing with me. But both Ivan and Ian came out to 1st floor and gave me a hug. I was a bit freaked out over this, but I sucked it up and walked inside with them. Upstairs on the 2nd floor was where my niece Iris and my nephew sleep, and my brother and his wife slept on the 3rd floor. Of course, Iris was excited to see me and wanted me to see her room. So she took me by my hand and ran me upstairs to her room. All I can say, this place was creepy, and it smelled like a rotting corpse of something. The room was cold, and it felt as if time stopped altogether. I suddenly snapped out of this trance I was in, and Iris was showing me her collection of items she got from our grandmother in Korea when we all went together. Iris was paying no attention to me at all, but she kept talking and then said, "Hey, Auntie, I'll be right back. Stay here, okay?" I agreed, and she left the room. I went over to one of the walls nearest to the window to where I saw the man earlier. On the wall, I noticed something was there. I took a few steps closer, and I saw the name Max carved into the wall. It, strangely enough, was also in what looked like blood or something. I got chills down my spine, and just as this was happening, I heard what sounded like a man say, "You'll never leave, Lanai." And then I was spun around by nothing. There was nobody there. I was alone, and something had what felt like a hand around my neck, choking me. The smell got even worse. It got colder, and suddenly I could no longer breathe. After about another 5 seconds of being choked, I was thrown up against the wall and slammed to the floor. I was crying, and I jumped up, really not giving a shit about what attacked me, but I practically mowed Iris over as I sprinted down the stairs, ran past my very confused brothers. I was shouting as I dashed for my keys and pretty much dived myself into my car. I started it up and looked one more time at the window, and a pair of yellow eyes with the most fucked up Joker-looking smile stared at me. I threw my '67 Chevy into reverse and never looked back. Now, after a few months, I live by myself in a house in Dayton. I think he followed me, because now I see, hear, and sense things. Stuff in my house gets thrown at me and breaks. I can still smell that rotting corpse smell to this every day. I remember it as clear as it was yesterday. It happened when I was in high school, where kindergarten campus, elementary, high school, and college campuses are all located near to each other. It is a huge school, so getting lost sometimes is inevitable. At that time, I was with my teammates, Rouge, Aaron, and Cecile. I was part of the math club in our campus, and the math room was relocated at the elementary campus, since the one we usually trained in was under construction. It was weirdly quiet when we were walking at a long catwalk passing through a big oak tree. The tree was old, and I remembered passing by it always when I was in kindergarten. A shiver ran against my skin as we passed it, and I remember feeling a bit dizzy, but shrugged it off. As we were nearing our room, we saw a commotion at a distance. Third graders, I believe, were outside of their room, and the teacher was trying her best to calm them while leading them to the fourth graders' room. The four of us looked at each other, curious about what is happening. So, we agreed to figure out what was happening. As we neared the distance, hairs at the back of my neck started to rise, and my eyes widened at what I heard next. Coming from the third grader's room, a loud animalistic roar and loud thumps were heard. We were petrified as we closed in. Cecile told Aaron to look at the windows, as it was apparent that all of us were already frozen on our places. Aaron stepped forward, and I saw right then the horror registered in his face, but curiosity got the best of us as to what happened. With the ear-deafening screams inside, I wanted to know what was happening. The next thing I remember then, that made me drop my bag, was the sight of a girl tied on a chair in a dim room, shouting. The teachers were holding her in place and praying while one of them is demanding that the demon inside of her to leave. My teeth chattered uncontrollably as the skeptic in me vanished. The sight was terrifying, that it made me think of horror movies that usually made me stay up at night. It was scary to see it in real life. We backed away when the possessed girl mentioned our names one by one and continued laughing. As her hair moved and we came face to face with it, her eyes were all white. She was pale. Saliva was dripping out of her outstretched mouth. One of the teachers hurriedly walked out of the room and yelled at us to go away, and as swiftly, we scrambled away from the scene. Several days later, the news got out and everyone in the campus knew what happened. They said that the girl played earlier at that huge oak tree and angered the ghosts living there. We still could not believe what happened, but one thing is for sure. The memory stayed with me forever, reminding me that sometimes curiosity can lead you to danger. I live in the same house since my birth till I'm 18. It used to be my grandfather's house, and he gave it to his sons. We all live together, my father and his two brothers with their wives and children. Our grandpa passed away when I was about to born. When me and my cousins were young, our parents scared us by telling that before Grandpa bought this house, there were husband and wife been murdered and their bodies were found in our water tanks and they became ghosts now. They told us this story to keep us away from the roof and water tanks as they all go to work. At my young age, I didn't notice these paranormal stuff happening, but after I reached 11, my life changed. We all had separate rooms, but me and my two sisters shared one room. I was just watching some videos on YouTube until late at night. It was around 2:00 a.m. and my sisters were asleep on their bed. My bed was the middle and the room was pretty dark. I could see only my mobile phone, then someone just tapped my knee 3 times. I was jumped with fear. I quickly used my phone light to see who it was, but no one was there. I thought it was only my imagination, and then I covered myself with a blanket and tried to sleep. And suddenly, I saw a white shadow of both man and woman with long hairs, and a young girl. I screamed as loud as I could. Everybody woke up, but they never believed me. That night, I shared my bed with my cousin, and I started noticing that kind of stuff later on day. After that day, 2 police officers came in our house and met my father. Me, my sister, and my cousins were watching from the stairs, and the police officers told him that they were looking for the murderers of Mr. and Mrs. They said they could not found for years, so they are going to close this case. We also found out that the Mrs. was pregnant at the same time she was murdered. We were all scared. Another big incident happened last month. My mother was working in the kitchen, and I was also sitting there gossiping with her. I mentioned the case of Mr. and Mrs., and suddenly the glass table beside me was broken. I was lucky that I stood up at the right moment, but there was no explanation of how it broke. In my house, there are 18 people living, and everybody has a haunting experience every time we mention their case. We are still living in that house as nothing serious harm has happened to anybody, but I'm still afraid.
When I was 11 years old, I spent the night hanging out with my closest friend at the time. I left around 7 o'clock. He was about 15 to 20 minute walk away from my house. It was the month of December, so it was icy and dark outside. While I was walking down the long sidewalk, I had to make a turn halfway. Across the turn down the sidewalk, I noticed a man way further down. He was alone at the moment. 10 seconds later, a 4-door car drove up to him. It was a long street till my turn, so I watched him talk to whoever was in the car. It sped off, and he just stopped, watching me as I walked. As I kept walking, all I heard was, "Hey you, come here, stop, hey you." So I freaked out. I started walking faster and then noticed he started running toward me. I started running for my life. Since the ground was covered in snow and ice, all I literally thought was, "Please, God, don't let me slip." I was crying, and I was running. He caught up extremely fast. I kept looking back and noticed the car slowly driving behind him. As I ran, I felt his arm reach out and try to grab the hood of my sweatshirt. By God's grace, his hand slipped, and I ran a block trying to find a house with the lights on. I finally found one and banged at the door, almost ready to break it down. This older couple finally answered, and I ran inside explaining what happened. The husband then went outside to try to find him. When he went out, he saw the man standing at the end of the street staring at him. Then he ran off. My mom called the police and pulled me out of school for 4 days afterward, and this guy was never found. For a while after, I would buy flowers and a card and leave it on the couple's step, thanking them for saving my life. God only knows what would have happened if he got me and dragged me to the car.
My name is Ronald, and I'm 19 years old. When this happened, I was 9. I grew up in a very small town in Montana, and during the summer, my brother and I would sometimes sell lemonade by the side of the road. We didn't make a lot of money, but we did have fun selling the lemonade to people who were passing by. One hot afternoon, my brother and I were standing at our lemonade stand when we noticed an old rusty car pass by us 2 or 3 times. At the time, it struck me as a little creepy. Eventually, the car slowed down and stopped right in front of the stand. There was a woman in the passenger seat, and as she rolled her window down, I saw she was really skinny with gray hair that was stained a sickly yellow hue. She was smiling at us, but her face didn't look normal. I couldn't see the man who was driving very well because he never looked at me and just stared straight ahead. Both of them seemed very odd, and their clothes were old and dirty. "You boys out here selling lemonade all by yourselves?" croaked the woman. "Yeah, my mom lets us," I replied. "Is your mom home?" she asked. "Yeah, she's in the house," I said. The woman turned and looked at the man who was driving. He nodded, still staring straight ahead. The woman turned back to me and said, "Okay, I'll have a lemonade." "That'll be 25 cents, I said as I poured her a glass. She rummaged around in her purse and I could hear coins clinking. Then she pulled out a $5 bill and held it out to me. A chill went down my spine. Why was she handing me a $5 bill if she had coins in her purse? Something just didn't feel right. I don't have any change, I lied. You can keep the change, she croaked. Just come and take it. I was struggling with myself, but $5 is a lot of money to a kid. I walked up to the car and reached out to take the $5 from her hand. As soon as my fingers touched it, the woman suddenly grabbed me by the wrist and began pulling me into the car. I screamed my lungs out, and my brother ran to the house yelling for help. The man floored the accelerator, and the car lurched forward. I fought with all my might and managed to wrench myself free from her grasp. The car stopped, and the man got out, but I was already running for my life. Then my mother rushed out, and I turned just in time to see the rusty old car speeding away. We told my mom what had happened, and she called the police. When my brother and I calmed down and went back to the lemonade stand, there was a $5 bill lying on the ground. We packed up the lemonade stand and put it away for good. I never had a lemonade stand after that cruel incident. Nobody can ever feel the pounding of my chest when that woman tried pulling me. I just thank my great God that I'm fine. This incident exactly took place on April 20th, 2019 in Irvine, California. I remember that it was around 11:30 at night. I was watching YouTube on my computer when suddenly I heard yelling from outside of my room. I immediately opened my door to see my mom running toward my room. The first thing she said was for me to call the police, in which I did. My mom heard a large sound and went to investigate, looking through the sliding glass door. And when she opened a curtain, what she saw was a figure on the other side of the glass looking back at her. It was a guy. He didn't move at all, but still stared at us, which was so creepy and weird. And his body was covered with a dark, deep liquid like as blood. I then gave my phone to my mom, and she said to the dispatcher with fear that there was a man who climbed onto our second-story balcony. I was a bit tense, not knowing what to do in a situation like this, considering I was in a room. Just moments later, my mom calmly called and told my dad, who was not at home, that there was a man that climbed onto our balcony around 11:30 p.m. When my dad was questioning my mom about the situation, I went back to my room to look out my window. After I did that, I heard a distant gunshot, and that guy already disappeared. Fast forward a couple minutes later, the police show up at our house asking questions about what just happened. Well, my mom told the police that there was a man and that he looked like he was in his mid-20s. She then told that the man climbed onto our second-story balcony, and when she first saw the man, she instantly went to the sliding door and held it in place before anything bad could happen. When the man was just about to run away, my mom told the cops that she saw a bright flash. My first thought that it might be a handgun for suppress. After Mom turned on the lights from my balcony, I saw there were multiple footsteps and handprints on the pillar and railing. A day later, a group of police detectives came to my house to investigate more into the case. They noticed a bullet hole on the ceiling of our balcony, and they told me and my parents that the hole was made by a handgun. The police then sent out a firefighter to come and cut the bullet out of the wood. A couple days later, we found out that the guy, who was actually in his mid-40s, was arrested, and that this wasn't the first time he had done something like this. On the 21st, he tried to break into another house in Irvine at 5 in the morning. And a couple hours later, I was shopping with my dad when my mom calls him to the sickening news that the suspect viciously murdered 2 people in Newport Beach just hours before the guy tried to break into our house. My heart just pumped at that time, and I thanked my mom so much for saving our life. If she wasn't there during the time, I could have possibly been killed that night.
It was the day before Valentine's Day in 2010. My mom and dad had asked me to dog sit our family German Shepherd at the house I grew up in Philadelphia, while they took their first them-only vacation since my brother or myself had been born. The plan was for them to be gone for 8 days. But the night in question, which is the third night after they had left, was reason enough for them to come home early. I was sleeping on the couch in the living room, as my old bedroom was now a storage room for my dad's stuff. At around 3 or 4 a.m., an explosively loud bang woke me up from a dead sleep, and my dog started going crazy. I assumed it was his barking that had woken me up, so despite being scared, my first thought was to sit up on the couch and to call him over to reassure him that everything was fine and he could go back to sleep. But just before I was going to sit up to do that, I heard a woman scream, "No, Dad, no," in absolute terror, followed by another incredibly loud bang. Immediately after, I felt tiny wood splinters fall into my eye from the wall the couch was against as they trickled down onto my face. That second bang turned out to be the sound of my neighbor shooting and killing his daughter. Those wood shavings that had gotten into my eye, they were from where the impact of either her body or the bullet, or even both, hit the wall directly on the other side of where I was sleeping. It had splintered some of the brick between our houses and caused my living room wall to push in a few millimeters. My head would have been pretty damn close to this spot had I actually sat up after the first bang to reassure my dog. Given that the bullet didn't actually come through the wall, I would have been fine even if I had sat up. But knowing what I know now, I'm glad I laid there for the extra second. Naturally, I called 911. I made sure my front and back doors and all the windows were locked. Within 3 minutes, the next bangs I was hearing were those of the police kicking the guy's door down and screaming for him to get on the ground. I sat at my window and watched them walk him out in cuffs and put him in a cruiser. It wasn't until the cops in the one cruiser had driven away with him in the back that I finally opened my door to talk to the other cops that were still on the scene. I told them what I'd heard and gave them a statement. A week later, I was subpoenaed to testify against him in court because it was claiming that the whole thing was an accident. However, I heard his daughter screaming before he fired the second round. No way that that was accidental. Testifying against him was terrifying, because if he got off, well, he was my parents' neighbor and I knew he wasn't above murder. Thankfully, the DA made sure he didn't get off. He's 70 years old now and has another 20 plus years of jail time, with no possibility of parole.
I was 14 back then, and we just moved to a house my father rented because of his work, which we'll spend about 2 months in. Me and my parents were happy with how good the house looked, and quickly we unpacked our things. We spent the whole day settling in and getting a little used to the house. After having, I went to my room to sleep as I was fatigued from the whole moving thing. My room had a bed, a mirror, my computer, and a closet. I turned off the lights and started sleeping. In the middle of the night, I heard some sound. It was coming from my slightly opened closet. I didn't move. I just slightly opened my eyes, and what I have seen made every hair on my body stand. From the slight opening, I could see an eye opened as wide as an eye can possibly be opened, staring at me. I was terrified, and I jumped out of the bed as I let a loud scream out. I went to my parents, who were sitting in the living room. As soon as I finished telling Dad about what I had seen while Mom was holding me, he ran to my room to look in the closet. He opened the closet, but there were nothing but clothes in it. He then told me it was a nightmare and helped me back to bed. My heartbeat went back to normal, and my parents wished me a good night while leaving the room. Before leaving, Mom told me she would leave the door slightly open to let in some light to help me sleep. But after that, I couldn't close my eyes. I was too afraid to do so. Was it really my imagination? Dad checked the closet, and I know there was nothing, but I tried to calm myself to fall asleep, and indeed I did. But not before leaving my phone's camera recording and facing the now fully closed closet. I thought of it as like a third eye keeping an eye on the closet. It was morning, and I slept well despite what had happened. I noticed my phone was still recording, and I stopped the recording. After taking a shower and washing my teeth, I went to have breakfast with my parents. And we moved to the living room, so my dad was watching TV and Mom reading a magazine. I was bored, so I thought I'd check the video. I played it and speeded it up. I had my headphones on. After 3 hours of absolute silence, there was a knock. Upon hearing, I immediately slowed the video back to normal. There was another knock, and after that, the closet door started to open slowly. I fell in shock as I watched a hand being placed on the side, the closet door to fully open it. From the closet came out what looked like a nun. Her face was fully covered with a veil. I was sweating buckets, watching her approach my bed. Upon reaching my bed, she raised her veil, which revealed a surprisingly beautiful face, and started to smile while looking down upon me. Her smile was kind of warm. She now opened her teeth to reveal an excellent set of white teeth. And then her smile grew wider and wider. My eyes nearly popped of their sockets as I saw her warm expression turn into an evil and horrifying one, and her warm yellowish skin turn to a color close to the whiteness of snow. Is she going to hurt me? But that was yesterday, and I'm fine now. What cut my line of thought was the sound of footsteps of someone approaching. The nun looked towards the room's door and quickly returned to the closet before closing it behind her. That someone must have come to check up on me, and that was what saved me. After showing the video to my parents, they had a horrified expression on their faces. In that same day, we moved out the house and warned its owner, who didn't believe it even after seeing the video, which he thought was made by me to prank him. It has been a year since then, but still, it is a sleepless one to me.
My name is Kai. When I was 17, me and my friends were hanging out one night and decided to watch a movie, making some popcorn. The movie was a hilarious thing. We had a good time laughing and eating popcorn and other snacks. When the movie was done, it was around 11:30 p.m. It already turned to pitch black outside. One of my friends, we'll call him Spencer, suggested that it would be a good idea to play a game of Spotlight. Spotlight is basically hide and seek, but in the dark, and the seeker has a flashlight. Where I live, my house is in a cul-de-sac, and if you walk down a little path in the backyard, you end up at a long street. Across that street, there's a giant field that used to have a basketball court and a playground, but it's been torn down since I was 8. So now the giant field was just empty. But there were a lot of bushes and hiding spots, and even a little cornfield, which made it perfect for a game like Spotlight. So we grabbed a few flashlights and headed to the field. After playing a giant game of rock, paper, scissors, it was decided that another friend, we'll call him Braden, was going to be the seeker. So me and Spencer went to hide together in the cornfield, since it would be hard to find someone in there. While I believe 4 other friends, John, Ethan, Liam, and my brother Cameron, went to hide all separately in different places in the field. For some information that'll be needed later on in the story, Spencer was 17, John and Ethan were 16, Braden and Cameron and Liam were 14. Once me and Spencer got comfortable in the cornfields, we started just to talk about random stuff and about the movie we watched earlier. Just as I told Spencer a joke and he started laughing, I put my finger to my lips and told him to shut up because I could hear someone rummaging through the corn and stomping on leaves. We both just sat there thinking it was Braden and hoping that he would find us. I then realized that it sounded like multiple people. Then Spencer said, "Wait, isn't Braden the only seeker?" My heart dropped. I began getting scared but tried not to say anything. I could also see that Spencer was scared too, and I bet he was about to shit his pants. Just then, we heard the men speaking to each other, and they didn't sound like any of our friends. So it was confirmed that there were 2 other men in the cornfields with us. They were talking very quietly, but I could hear some words, boys, snatch, just like that. I felt like time stopped. About a minute later, we heard them walk off, and I'm going to assume that they left the cornfield. But after the 2 men left, we heard someone yelling, "Get the fuck away from me! Help!" It sounded like Cameron. Me and Spencer immediately rushed out of the cornfields and went to find Cameron. Just then, everyone else came out of their hiding spots and went after the 2 men. Spencer and John were the tallest and most muscular, so they went in and beat the shit out of them. John put one in a headlock and threw him to the ground. Then, one man sprang at Spencer suddenly. Spencer screamed and took out his large pocket knife he always has with him, and then stabbed him 3 times. As they proceeded to beat them, I went to Cameron, helped him to get up, and yelled for everyone to run. Spencer listened and shoved the guy to the ground, but John didn't listen and continued beating the man. After Spencer pulled John off the man, they both finally ran away. We went back to Spencer's house since it was the closest, and we told everything to his mom, and then she called the police. When the police arrived, we led them down to the field, but of course, the men were gone. However, there was still some blood left on the path where Spencer stabbed one of the men, so the police took a sample of it. Once me and Cameron got home, he told me that the man Spencer attacked had a knife, but the other had nothing. I was feeling a little uncomfortable about what we'd done for our self-protection at the cornfield, but then I realized that was a good thing Spencer attacked the man with the knife, because if John tried to attack that man, he could have been stabbed to death as he had no weapon. I'm just thankful none of my friends were hurt that evening. It could have ended much worse. After that, we never heard back from the police, so neither of the men was found.
My name is Luca, and I live in Germany. This happened when I was 17 years old. I was babysitting my mother's friend's baby. It was bedtime for the baby, so I took him to bed and went back down the stairs to watch some TV. At some point, the baby suddenly started crying. I got up and went to the bedroom to check what is wrong with him. The window was open. I knew it was shut earlier before. That freaked me out, and to be honest, I was scared. But there was nothing I could do, so I shut the door immediately, took care of the baby, and put him back to sleep. When I walked out of the room, I realized that in the corner there was a clown sitting on the floor. The whole floor was kind of dark. I couldn't see very clearly, but he looked like he had a smile on his face as he was staring at me. But it just looked like a toy, so I didn't really think about it anymore. I just went back to watching TV. Only 10 to 15 minutes later, the baby started crying again. I went upstairs and went into the bedroom again, feeling anxious. And when I saw that the window was open again, my heart dropped. My entire body was sweating. I tried to calm down the crying baby. I wanted to call my mom so badly, but I left my phone on the couch. When I went back to the bedroom door, I screamed at the top of my lungs. The clown that was sitting on the ground in the corner of the room earlier was now gone. I was horrified. My entire body was all nerves. Then I heard footsteps. Constantly, but unequal and odd jumping steps. I thought I heard a creepy giggling sound too. But that doesn't matter. I was almost out of my mind. I ran as fast as I could to grab my phone and call the police. Speaking gibberish, I told them that a clown broke into the house where I was babysitting. The cops arrived 10 minutes later and checked the whole house, but they didn't find the clown. They called my mom and told her everything, and a few hours later, she came back with her friend. To this day, I still don't know if they found him, but hopefully they did. I cannot get a minute of sleep when thinking about that night.
When I was in the 11th grade, some friends and I used to be in an elementary school together that had recently shut down. When we heard the school shut down, we all decided to check out our neighborhood school. This idea got my friends and I very excited. We agreed to show up at the school around 11:30 p.m. The night we chose to do this was ironically raining heavily with the occasional sounds of thunder, which made it a bit more unsettling. Our meeting spot was the playground, which all of us showed up at. Now we just had to find a way into the school. After searching around the property, one of my friends found an unlocked window that led to the main office. All of us climbed inside the school from the unlocked window. Getting inside that school was a little unnerving. It was very dark in there, and you could barely see where you were going. But some of my friends had a couple of flashlights, so we were fine. The main office was trashed. There were papers everywhere, with broken printers and other pieces of technology scattered around the room. Every time one of my friends would flash his light into a new direction of the office, I was afraid the light would land on a person or something even worse. The main office led to the main part of the school. In the main part of the school, it had a hallway to the left of you and a hallway to the right of you, and straight ahead from the office was the library. Trying to get into the library didn't work. The door was locked. So we decided to go down the hallway to the left of us. Flashing that light down the dark, far, quiet hallway startled me. While walking down the hallway, we all suddenly stopped in our tracks looking at what we just saw. At the end of the hall, we saw a very tall figure that appeared to be a woman. She had long blonde hair and she wore a torn-up, dirty wedding dress. We were about 10 feet away from her. But when the flashlight landed on the woman, she quickly ran into a classroom. It was very odd. My friends and I were very afraid. Why was this woman with a wedding dress standing there in this abandoned school, just staring at us? We just stood there waiting for anything to happen. Standing in that very dark hallway for 3 minutes felt like 20. Ring! Suddenly, the school fire bells went off, making us sprint as fast as we could back to that main office window. As we were running, the lights aggressively flickered, making it harder to see. It was like someone was flicking the light switch as fast as they possibly could, making the lights abruptly switch on and off. It terrified us. Then we rushed into the main office. When we were in there, one of my friends yelled, "Oh shit!" I looked to see what he was looking at, and what I saw made me lose it. Behind us in the main office was the same woman. She was now closer. Her hair covered her eyes, but that wasn't the scariest part. The scariest part was her mouth. This woman's mouth was unnaturally wide. It would be impossible for any human to open their mouth as wide as this woman's mouth. She was still staring at us, but with a creepy giggling. All of us screamed when we saw this disturbing woman. We got out of that window so fast and made it outside. By the time we got outside, someone already had called the cops because of the fire bell, and my friends and I were caught. We told the cops there was someone else in the school and to go get them. 6 cops entered the school looking for the woman that we encountered. After about 30 minutes, the cops came out of the building looking unsettled. And while I was in the car, I could hear the 6 cops that entered the building telling the other cops that there was very unusual activity in that school. 15 minutes later, we were escorted home by the police. My friends and I were all grounded for a long time, but we didn't tell our parents or anyone about the woman we saw. I still remember exactly how that woman looked. Her face, her hair, her wedding dress, and that disturbing mouth I can't even describe.
When I was 12 years old, my family and I moved to a new house. Even though it was a beautiful house, I was scared of it, especially my parents' room. I used to have awful dreams where I would enter that specific room only to see a dark shadow staring at me. It was a tall shadow. It seemed like a man, but I never saw his face since his whole being was just pitch black. I would close the door to my room since my parents' room was in front of mine and I could easily see their room from my bed. One night, I woke up from what seemed like a dreamless sleep, feeling that someone was staring at me. At first, I couldn't see anything. But after my eyes got used to the dark, I saw 2 things. First, my door was open, which wasn't normal since I always closed it at night. And second, there was the shadow I often saw in my nightmares. This time, it wasn't in my parents' room. It was in front of my room, just staring at me. I was so scared. I couldn't break eye contact with it, and after what seemed like hours, finally the shadow stopped staring at me and walked to my brother's room. After that, I can't remember when I got back to sleep, but only remember waking up, and since then, everything seemed normal. I thought it was only a nightmare and brushed it off. A couple years later, my family and I moved to another state, but we kept the house as a place to visit during the holidays. One day, my uncle had a nasty fight with his wife, and he asked my parents if he could stay at our old house for some time. My parents said yes. So he temporarily moved there for a while. And one day, we visited him for the holidays, and while we were talking, he asked me if I had ever dreamt of creepy shadows in front of my room. My parents laughed since they knew nothing of what I had seen. I stayed quiet. That night, I talked to my uncle and explained to him what I had seen and what I thought was a nightmare. I was really scared since I had told no one about that nightmare. He listened to me, and after a while, he explained he had seen the same thing just staring at my room. After that, my uncle talked to my parents, and we never visited that house again. My uncle moved back with his wife, and after a religious ceremony to cleanse it, my parents put the house in the market. However, to this day, the house remains unsold. Even though the shadow never hurt any of us physically, I still panic whenever I remember how that thing stared at me, how I felt that there was nothing I could do against it. I don't think I'll ever forget that.
One day, I got a call from a few friends of mine about going to the mall. It was a stressful week at work, so I thought some retail therapy would definitely help. We ended up shopping for a few hours, so we decided that hitting the food court would be the spot. I gave the girls my order, and I told them I would come back and find them as I needed them after I used the restroom. The restrooms are at the end of the large and wide corridor. They were your typical mall type with lots of stalls. Anyway, so I sat down to use the bathroom, and I could see from the gap on the floor between the wall of the stall and the floor, lots of movement from someone's shadow. I wasn't sure if they were getting changed or not, so I didn't pay attention at first, but it felt like the shadow was coming from above at some points. You know, as if the light above was being obstructed by something. After maybe the third time, I decided to look up, and I could see a phone and parts of a guy's arm leaning over. Someone was taking photos of me. I instantly shouted out, "What are you doing, you pervert?" And in a moment of sheer shock and disbelief, this all very quickly turned into fear as I got up and leaped out of the stall and was greeted by an empty bathroom. Not one person was in sight, and from the quick glance of the mirrors opposite, there was only one stall shut, and it was the one next to me. I ran for the restroom exit, but it was locked. Luckily, it had a twist lock and I could turn it as I did. I heard the stall open from behind me. I got out immediately and turned as I exited and noticed a sign on the door saying, "Closed for maintenance." This sign was not here when I went in. I screamed some more, shouting to get anyone's attention as I ran down the corridor toward the food hall, and had obviously caught the attention of a few people. A group of 3 guys stopped me and clearly could see the panic in my eyes. They asked me questions and I explained. 2 guys ran toward the ladies' restroom and one to find security. Security arrived within seconds. After a while, a rather large crowd had gathered due to the commotion, and although I was in the comfort of my friends, security, and now the police, I never felt so alone. Security and police, nor 2 guys found anyone. There was a few staff only, and fire exit doors open down the corridor, so plenty of escape routes for whoever this guy was. I gave my statements down at the station later that day once my parents showed up. The police said they had security tapes from the cameras that point down the corridor and will keep us updated with any news. Hopefully, they find this guy.
My name is Jessica, and I was 8 at the time this occurred. I was the youngest and the only girl, so my older brother Hunter was taking care of me. At the time, Hunter was 14, and we had to stay home while my parents went to the bar with their friends and my older brothers, since they were much older than us. Our house was in the middle of the woods, and our closest neighbor was maybe half a mile away. My brother and I stayed up watching TV shows until 2 in the morning. We finished watching an episode of Full House when we heard a very big crash upstairs in my brother Josh's room. We stared at each other for a moment. Then my brother got up and grabbed one of the kitchen knives and told me to come upstairs with him, just in case there was something in the house and he didn't want me to be left alone. My brother is a brave guy and doesn't get scared easily, so right now he wasn't very consumed of fear like I was. I followed my brother up the stairs, and he then came to a halt, which made me bump into him. He stood there for a second, in silence, just standing there. I got antsy and asked him what was wrong. He then said, "Go get the house phone and call 911. Me being confused, I looked to see what was in front of only him to make him ask me this. And there stood a white man, about 6'3", with dark brown hair and bloodshot eyes. I told Hunter that he needs to come with me because I had no idea what this man would do to him. I grabbed Hunter's hand, ran downstairs, and grabbed the house phone. We dashed into the bathroom and locked the door. I could hear the footsteps of the man slowly walking down the stairs. I could hear my brother on the phone with the police behind me. I was fixated on the footsteps, which got closer and closer to the bathroom door. It was silent, as I could no longer hear my brother on the phone or the footsteps. When all that made me wake from fixation was the loud pounding of the bathroom door, I screamed in fright. For the man was at the door now. He stopped for a moment, and I could hear his deep, harsh breathing. He then whispers, "I'm not gonna hurt you. All I want to do is give you kids some sweets." My brother then yelled, "We don't want any of your damn sweets." I could tell my brother was getting angrier by the second. And then the door handle starts to shake very fast and frequently. We back away from the door and by the window, which was across the room from the door. My brother opened it just in case we would need to escape this way before the police got here. The man punches through the door and starts to grab for the handle. We jumped out of the window and landed on our grass, and we sprinted to the woods. We found this big bush to hide behind. We crouched down and waited for something to happen. Few seconds later, we heard police sirens in the distance. We saw the man from the window run down the stairs and out of the front door. He ran into the woods and ran past us. Thank God he didn't notice us there. The police pulled into our driveway and we saw a chance to run to them. We dashed to them and told the police he was in the woods. They searched for him, and once they came out, they had him in their clutches. I've never been more relieved in my life. We stayed at the house with a police officer until my parents and older brothers arrived home. 2 days later, the police had found our neighbors murdered, and that the man was on a killing spree, and we were about to be next. I am now 13 and still have nightmares of that time. Hunter moved out, and my parents moved to the city so we wouldn't live so far out.
This is a story when I was just 6 years old that I never, ever forget. When I was a little boy, I lived in a big house that had a little chicken coop. Behind my house, you could spot a soccer field, even from far away because it's uphill. One day, 2 of my cousins, sister, and I decided to go uphill and play on that soccer field. We were going up innocently without knowing what was going to happen to us. As we arrived on top, we were surprised because there were many people around there, and it was just like this festival kind of situation. It was very crowded and loud, but there was enough space to walk comfortably. The 4 of us got a little bit sad. We couldn't play soccer. There was nothing else to do. So we decided just to take a walk and followed the pathway that headed on top. As we went further up, a dead end was what was waiting for us. We then decided to go back because there was nowhere to go. But as soon as we turned around and stepped down, we noticed that the crowded loud sound, the people at the ground, were gone. Completely. I got scared and shocked. The people vanished in an instant. Not only me, my cousins and my sister were as shocked and scared as me. We just started to scream and ran away quickly. I started late on running away, but I soon caught up with them, passing one of my cousins. But as I was running away, I could feel someone grab one of my legs all of a sudden. It made me fall down hard instantly. My face hit on the ground and my nose was bleeding. I cried so much that time, but my cousins and my sister helped me get up and we ran as fast as we could. When we got home, we got yelled at by my mom, and she asked my sister how come I got injured the way I did and sprained my ankle badly. It was red and swollen. My face got a bit of scratches, and my lips and nose were all bleeding. Later, after that day, my sister told the whole story about that mysterious vanishing to my mother. And then she changed her face, looking a little bit uncomfortable. That field up the hill is a graveyard. And we were all shocked by knowing the truth. So the people we saw up there were dead people. But still, thinking about it again, how can you explain my accident? I thought it was one of my cousins who caught my ankle, but running away and trying to grab someone's ankle is impossible. Maybe it was a warning for me not to go to that field ever again. In any case, I still remember that event so clearly that it gives me chills.
It was a beautiful day in August. My family and I had just finished packing for our trip. We were bored and hadn't planned to do anything because our trip was in a couple of days. So we all decided to go to the safari zoo place because it was only an hour drive and a great way to kill time. When we got there and we noticed that there were a bunch of people at the zoo, my family could get impatient of this, so we asked the receptionist if there was anything we could do that wasn't too busy. Lucky for us, there were private tours. They were a bit expensive, but the lady assured us that the tour guides were highly educated and great at their job. We were given animal food and introduced to our private tour guide. When we first saw our tour guide, we noticed he was a little off. He had a weird lisp, didn't speak very much English, and had a really bad lazy eye. When my dad first tried to greet him, he ignored my dad and gestured us to one of the safari minivans. We were a little taken aback, but didn't think anything of it. Once we got into the van, we noticed that there was a bad smell and a bunch of animal food on the floor. He started driving before we could get our seatbelts on. We first passed by lions and hyenas. It was all really cool. There were also a bunch of vans and tour buses behind and in front of us that were taking all the attention of the animals. Out of the blue, the tour guide turned onto a trail that no other buses or vans were going on. My dad got a little suspicious and asked the tour guide where we were going. The tour guide replied with elephants, shortly because once again he didn't know English very well. Well, we really wanted to see the elephants at that time, so we all got excited. After a good 10 minutes of driving, we noticed that we had seen no animals and no other tour guides, just a never-ending forest. My mom, who has paranoia, was getting worried and repeatedly asked the tour guide where he was going. But then, he never answered. All of a sudden, he stopped the car and said he had to get something from the back of his car. My dad was getting red flags and watched him from the rearview mirror. And then, my dad hopped into the driver's seat, locked all the doors immediately, and pressed the accelerator to the floor. With a fearful face that I've never seen before like that, we were all slammed into the backs of our seats. "What's going on?" my mom yelled. "I saw him holding an axe," my dad yelled back. We made it back to the safari and to the receptionist. We explained the whole situation and she called the police. They had a long search and finally he got caught after a few hours. We got a full refund and later found out that our tour guide didn't even work at the safari but used a fake ID and had history linked with murder, kidnapping, and other crimes we won't mention. We also found out the reason that the car smelled so bad was because the tour guide admitted to killing multiple safari animals and taking them home. To this day, I still wonder what would have happened if my dad didn't look in the rearview mirror when the tour guide stopped the car.